Yeah, so look, I want to get us to talk about the homestand model itself. Be a good spot for Harsha to get in here, but I'm going to do it through just pointing to an example that sort of always blew my mind. And like one of the things I hate in esports is there's this like fake sense of fraternity in the industry where it's like all esports are equal and we're all in it together and we just want the industry to succeed. And those people, by the way, go as soon as they're finished talking to you and saying, good luck in your thing, they go and make 10 decisions to fuck you over, right? It's all just fake nonsense. So when Dallas Fuel had their homestand, and remember, they came out and there was a press release where they said we sold all our tickets to a maximum capacity crowd. They also misrepresented the number of the crowd because they said it was 9,000 when it was 2 days of 4,500, not the same. And also left out the convenient fact that they were giving away free tickets in fucking, was it GameStop? Or Best Buy or
One of
something
those two,
with
yeah.
every purchase. So anyway, everyone was all high-fiving and saying, yeah, we've done it. We've sold out the homestand. Overwatch esports can absolutely work. Now, keep in mind, this was happening while the pandemic was just sort of brewing in the background. Definitely not in a lab, though. And we all had to change the model right afterwards. But I heard the numbers, and I saw the numbers of the Dallas homestand, and they were making it out like it was profitable, and it absolutely wasn't. So the homestand model was a bust even without the pandemic, if it was working. So
yes.
Okay,
let me talk about why it's a bust.
And then we'll get Harsha in.
Yeah, so just to describe what the homestand model had to be in order to be successful, and this was one of the major sticking points with a lot of owners, is that the cost of the homestand didn't really change no matter what the size of the audience was. You know, renting a larger arena obviously is more expensive, but the real expensive part was the expectation that each ownership group was going to pay for the production of that week's homestands. Right. And so if you sold out a 5,000 person venue, it was the same as effectively selling out a 1,000 person venue in terms of cost. So the real battle was, how do you make the homestands profitable? Because you need a large arena to do that, because you can't just do it at a smaller scale, because there were expectations around production quality, and the production quality was basically a fixed cost. And this was a massive, massive sticking point as we moved into homestands. Arja?
I can talk about this with like some level of detail, because I think at least my team probably went to the most homestands out of all the teams, because we were doing like an American tour, I guess, before. Like in just 5 weeks of homestands, we had gotten like strep throat twice each. We were like living in hotels 4 days out of the week, like every week. I couldn't even bring like half my team to the homestands because like they were too sick to travel, basically. And this is before COVID. Like I think if I had to put up with like several more weeks of that, I think I would have just straight up like retired on the spot. I think a lot of my players probably were in like very similar boats, because it was actually just so mentally taxing, not even being like home ever. We couldn't practice ever because, you know, you only get like 2 real days of practice a week. We're having to find like random PC cafes where your desk is like, you know, 20 inches long and you can't even put your mouse pad on it, like just to practice in other states. So it was from like a team perspective, it was absolutely terrible. I don't know how much detail I can go into with you know, the monetary figures, but I'll just say this in terms of like what I know of several of the homestands. They're operating at close to like $1 million losses for several of these homestands, including like, you know, selling merch, selling tickets, selling, you know, all these like fan packs and stuff like that. From what I can tell, there was so much money going into the production, going into the venue, going into, there's like so many random different costs too. Like you have to get like a PPA, so like a player practice area, basically, where every team can practice for several hours a day. I was told by several teams that you know, these losses were approaching like 600, 700,000 per homestand, and some of these teams were signed up for, you know, 4 or 5 homestands for the year. Like
basically
that makes
bankrupt you almost, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like when you guys say COVID saved the league, like I totally agree. I can't see any world where this would have, like, I think Overwatch would have just died after 2020 if COVID didn't happen.
Yeah,
Basically, what people don't know is even if you take the number of people attending, even if they really were buying tickets, spoiler, in America at least, that's almost never happened as far as I know. ESL in CSGO used to literally, they've done this, give like a fucking box of tickets to like a student group and go hand them out to people. Like no one's ever even reaching the capacity of the 10,000 they claim, right? Even if they did though, what you have to remember is this, that's a venue where you go and watch someone for 3 hours in concert. You don't run it for 12 hours with all these games and make a weekend pass $100. I'm not a fan of them, but people will know if you try to get like Taylor Swift tickets. Sure as fuck isn't like the pro rata down to 3 hours out of 100 for a weekend. It'd be like, what, 500 just for the 3 hours or something like that? Like the scale never made any sense. So actually the joke is it looks great and all the people are going to come up to Monty and go, I'm a huge fan of Overwatch, but you actually aren't adding revenue. You're fucking directly increasing the expenses of having a team. Like think about it. If you had a team, you bought a slot for 20, 30 million, you do 7 of these, that's it, it's conservative, you do like 700k or whatever, mate, you can't even last a couple of years, you'll just be out the whole league. There's no way you're going to get that money through the door.
The reality is that they had to sell out much larger venues in order to make profits. Like that's just it, because of the expectations around the production quality of the homestands and the experience at the homestands. So it wasn't that the 1,000-person venues in Texas weren't selling out. It's that it was still operating at a massive loss, right? Yeah. And I think that was one of the main issues, and that became really serious. And it got so fucking insane, I have to say, by 2019 regarding the homestand model. What was happening at Blizzard was that there were people who were high-level Blizzard employees whose jobs were to figure out the homestand problem. Now, this is a epic logistics issue, as we've been discussing, probably an impossible logistics issue. But I would be in meetings where we would be talking about the caster pairs and our schedules and where we would be at certain times in the year and how long we would be on these like road trips away from home as well. And this was happening in the kind of like back half of the season of 2019. And what was so crazy is we all knew that this was a disaster. Everybody knew that this was not going to be economically feasible and that it was absolute insanity to be spending resources on even exploring this idea. They probably spent, no joke, millions of dollars trying to figure out this problem on, travel agents, high-level employee salaries, everything like that. The amount of effort it took to make this schedule. When what should have been happening, and this is after Nate left, and I can only speculate as to the reasons why Nate left, but I would imagine that this was one of the reasons why Nate Nanzer, the commissioner, left. Because the upper level people like Pete Vlastelica, who was ultimately in charge of absolutely everything, he was Nate's boss, did not want to go to Bobby Kotick and tell him, hey, this thing that we had planned just ain't going to work. I think he didn't want to be the bearer of bad news to Bobby Kotick. And so they just kept this farce going on internally for such a long time, when in reality, we could have just said, okay, well, let's make a sustainable structure and make that plan instead. And that was never even really contemplated. And had the pandemic not happened, the Titanic would definitely have hit the iceberg, by the way. Like the iceberg was coming. Everybody on the ship knew the iceberg was coming. And it would be very easy to just change course and avoid the iceberg. But luckily, the pandemic melted the iceberg before the Overwatch League could hit it, which sustained the life of the Overwatch League, I think, for several more years.
If I can just bring this in as well, because I know I am gonna do some stuff with the Morgan Stanley document, but this was from the original document about what their sort of expectations were for live event attendance and profits therefrom, right? So keep in mind, this all has the guise of being sound. It does have a disclaimer saying it's just financial advice. Things may vary, but it's Morgan Stanley's name on it. So it's a prestigious name. Anyway, it says here, we see each regular season event involving 18 mini tournaments. That changed, didn't it? Taking place over 3 days and drawing 18,000 live fans per day. Like, that would make it the biggest esport of all fucking time.
That is an NBA stadium, by the way.
Yes.
Full.
Yeah.
Well, and in some cases, and for some franchises, not even, right?
Yeah.
Drawing 18,000 live fans per day, which after a $25 average ticket price translates into 13 million in ticket sales revenue. We then assume that merchandise sales are 20% of ticket sales. So keep in mind that what you have to do is you have to sell out an 18,000 seat stadium for Overwatch at $25 a ticket. Nobody could do that. Donald Trump and the art of the deal could not do that, right? Then 20% of attendees have to spend merchandise equivalent to 20% of that 13 million. It is absolute nonsense. And so, the reality of the homestand model was just it was pie in the sky from day one, and Monty's 100% right. Like, I saw a lot of people gloating that, like, Richard Lewis said the Overwatch dying would drive investment away from esports, but the investors left before the Overwatch League died. He has really lost. He was never right about the league. The pandemic basically stopped. Like, that's the one thing I didn't factor into my prophecy. Sorry, I'm not really the Kwisatz Haderach, just to do a Doom reference to keep that running on this podcast. Yeah, I didn't foresee a global pandemic. My bad. But, like, the league would have 100% died, 100% after one season of this madness. Players were already looking at this schedule, and I know Harsh can confirm this. The South Korean players were looking at this schedule and going, I would rather do my national service.
Well, also, Richard, here's the other low-key thing that saved the Overwatch League: pandemic loans to the teams.
Yeah.
Which I suppose I'll set that up a little bit, and then we can talk about that, because I did a report on this. And basically what happened was, and Jacob Wolf did some great reporting around this too. Basically what happened was, during the pandemic, obviously there was these, payment protection plan loans that you could get from the government, PPP, small PPP energy. And of course, during the pandemic, everyone had to move from the homestand model. But of course, we were already committed to, like, the studio closing in Burbank, and there was still going to be costs involved, not to mention teams couldn't play while we were figuring out how to pivot to online. And so team owners are going, look, we got to keep this team running. We got to keep this franchise running. We got to keep this venue that we can't use rented. Can you give us some of our fucking money back, Blizzard, right? And Blizzard went, listen, there's been a lot of talk about you getting some money back. I don't know if you know about these fantastic things called PPP loans. Yep. And I got told that basically there was people at Blizzard that helped talk the team owners through how to apply for these loans, which, by the way, I'm not saying anybody in esports scammed anyone, but when I looked at the intent of the PPP loans, I thought they were for, like, mom and pop stores, small businesses, not VC-owned mega corporation brands. Like, and there's been a ton of scams in this area. I don't know if there's been any in esports, but, just to put it into context, FaZe was like one of these orgs that was having, can we get more of them PPP loans? Fucking wicked, we'll have loads of them, and you see how badly they've been run lately. So, I don't know. I mean, that for me was another aspect of the pandemic that artificially kept the league alive. There was another, like, what does it say about your fucking esport that a much more reliable revenue stream was a government bailout? Fuck this game,
I just want to know when Biden's going to cancel the franchise fee debt. By the way, along those lines, there's a couple more things from the early days that were factors that I thought were crazy as well. So here's one right out the gate. This just shows you that, like, esports game devs, they don't care about conflict of interest. They only care if someone like Richard makes enough noise that some people go, wait a minute, and then maybe they, like, just make a real sort it out, will you? And then don't even check if they did. So one thing that I remember was mental is when they announced all the slots around the world, when they announced that one of the Chinese slots, and the Chinese slot went to NetEase, the people who distribute Overwatch in their region, but then there were going to be other slots bought by other people. Now, if anyone can't see the conflict of interest, it's mental. That's actually absurd. And by the way, go watch Richard's channel if you want to see some hilarious stuff on how it ended in China. Like, the joke is they essentially said, fuck Bobby Kotick, and all just pulled out at the end.
Yeah, which is why I think that's driven this theme deal, because you can get Overwatch 2 on Steam now, and because they lost the distribution rights with NetEase in China, making the game effectively banned. By the way, this decision, ultimately, we can laugh about all the others. The argument with people, people assume it's Bobby Kotick because a NetEase executive said it was one jerk, was the words he used, that caused them to pull out of the deal. But essentially, the inability to distribute the game in China is probably the final nail in the coffin. It was already on shaky ground, but the Chinese teams, from a legal perspective, couldn't play the game in China, so they were having to come up with solutions for it. They were hoping to get another Chinese distributor, but what they found out was they don't, because they've all got to work together. There's a lot of like nepotism and corruption, but also, of course, it all goes back to the Chinese Communist Party government. Ultimately, they couldn't find another Chinese partner. Now, Steam, on the other hand, Valve has acquiesced and has a specific version of Steam that you can get games on in China. And I'm just wondering, this is speculation, of course, but I'm just wondering if what drove the deal to sell on Steam wasn't just a dwindling player base, but it's because Steam is approved to be sold in China because they work with the Chinese government to create a version that will keep the youth away from all the objectionable material, like Tibet flags. So, I think that one decision right there, and like you saw how derisory it was. Like Chengdu Hunters just walk away. They walked away from it like it was a burnt out car. Like, I'll give a fuck. You know what I mean? Everyone's laughing at them for missing out on the bag, but I don't think people realize how much you fucking spend on these teams. Like people, I saw some official Overwatch podcast saying, I think the costs of running a team for like a season is about $300,000. Not in your wildest dreams is it that low. So, at the end of the day, I think that it's just been a cavalcade of like terrible decisions around this league. And to wrap it up in a bow, I think the reason they're getting $6 million back, these team owners, is to avoid potential litigation at having been misrepresented and sold a lemon when they bought the slot. I can't imagine that there isn't something like that going on. Let's look at the material facts. They went to a law firm. We know that. Collectively, for the first time ever, all the team owners go to a law firm. The law firm specializes in technology, right? And they say, we're not doing a class action. We're definitely not, but we're just using them for communication. We know that. Then we know after that happened, Blizzard waived all future fees, and now we're giving them $6 million back. Nah, guys, come on. We all know what's gone on there, in my opinion. So, yeah, I think there's just been some fucking calamitous, like last minute decisions around the league just to finally get it put to bed.
Yeah, I'm actually curious, Harsha, what your experience was, because you, as a coach, you coached both on. So you've had a very interesting career in that, like. You worked with Andy Miller, who owns NRG, who's more of like an endemic esports person at this point in time. Then you worked with a professional sports owner for the Vancouver Titans, who owns the Canucks, right? The hockey team. And then you worked for not a sports team or a radio network, a radio company that bought the Houston Outlaws. So what was each of their takes around the financial stability of the league and what they had been sold versus what they had been getting? And what did the owners want? Because I'm very curious, because you actually hit all three of the major ownership categories, I would say.
Well, this won't. I can probably talk about this freely without revealing sources or anything. But at least for working with NRG and Andy Miller and whatnot, like that team was very, I guess, what's the word for it? Like enthusiastic, or like they expected Overwatch to be like a big like cultural phenomenon from what I could tell from speaking to them. Andy generally seems to be an owner that like does really like enjoy participating in Overwatch League, and they put together good teams every year and whatnot. So that was my experience with them. But then when I worked with the Titans, I think a lot of the people that spoke to me are no longer working at the company, but basically like it seemed like they were sold a false bill of goods from their perspective, and then instantly they were just so antagonistic with Blizzard. Like this is a figure that I remember, and again, like this won't reveal any who told me this, but they told me that like after they were sold the team, and I don't know why they didn't ask this beforehand. They told me after they were sold the team, they asked how many Overwatch players were in the Pacific Northwest and like Vancouver region. And they were told something insane, like 30,000 people actively play the game within not just Vancouver, but like British Columbia and like the Pacific Northwest of the US. And like, let's say esports has like a 1% conversion rate, if anything.
Yeah.
For,
That's fair.
So what is 1% of 30,000? That's like 300 people. So I don't know what they really expected when they were joining the league. And then, if we talk about Outlaws, that was a radio company. You can say what you want about esports, but radio is also not an amazing venture right now. So I think they kind of struck out with both deals, if you were to ask me.
By the way, another example of how brilliant it is to have global esports leagues and accommodate everyone's feelings and inclusivity is a code for exclusivity. So, for example, when they had the Overwatch World Cup, one of the most lauded things, do you remember a team being played, Monty? They were called Chinese Taipei. Do you remember that country?
Of course.
I don't know. I keep looking on it. I can't find Chinese Taipei. I'm looking at what country's called what country calls themselves Chinese Taipei. I can't find it, but I can find all these VODs on the internet saying they played. So essentially, if you're from the country of Taiwan, you had to pretend you weren't from your country. And even though you're not in any way in a Chinese league, you have to pretend you're from another country, owned by another country, as part of their country, to participate in a video game tournament. So that's another example of how the rot that began in esports, we were way ahead of the Saudi stuff, boys. We were all on the China train back then.
I think it was even more ridiculous. I think they had a white flag as their national.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.